Dave, we are ready to begin the broadcast.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Conference of Great Lakes St. Lawrence Governors and Premiers Webinars Summit Series. I'm David Nafsker, Executive Director of the conference. We're hosting this series of webinars to talk about some of the most important issues facing our region, engaging some new voices, and talking with all of you about ways we can better work together to accelerate our work. As you saw before I began speaking, we are grateful to our very large group of sponsors that have helped make this series possible. We'll again display our sponsor slides at the end of today's webinar. Today's webinar will be focused on aquatic invasive species. Erika Jensen will be our moderator. She'll first make some introductory remarks and then invite presentations from our three terrific speakers. Following that, she will moderate questions and answers. And if you do have a question at any time, I'd encourage you to please type it into the question box that you can find on the GoToWebinar interface. We will get to the questions toward the end. And please identify if your question is for the panel as a whole or for one of the speakers in particular. We are recording today's session and it will be posted shortly after we conclude to our website at www.gsgp.org. Please share it with anyone in your network who you think may be interested. With that, I would again thank you for joining us, and I will turn it over to Erika Jensen, the Executive Director of the Great Lakes Commission. We look forward to today's conversation. The floor is now yours, Erika.
Thank you, Dave. And thank you, everyone, and especially to the conference for the opportunity to be here today and to moderate this excellent panel. As many of you are aware, the impacts of aquatic invasive species are quite costly to our environment and economy, and in some cases, human health. And they are a longstanding priority for both the Great Lakes Commission and all of the Great Lakes states and provinces. And that's why it's important that we take steps to prevent their introduction when and where we can, and manage their populations to mitigate the damages when the species are already here. So our panelists today will explore some ongoing and new approaches to tackling this complex problem. And that will include taking steps to block invasive carp from reaching the Great Lakes, creative approaches to supporting the management of the widespread invasive plant known as phragmites, and opportunities to incentivize and leverage our management efforts to gain even greater value. So with that brief opening, I want to now introduce you to our three panelists this afternoon. First, I would like to welcome Director Colleen Callahan. Ms. Callahan is the Director of the Illinois Department of Natural Resources, where she began her appointment in 2019. She brings a wealth of professional and public service experience to the department. Prior to her appointment, Director Callahan served as the State Director of Illinois' Rural Development for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and she has dedicated most of her professional career to agriculture communications, serving as the first female agribusiness director for WMBD Radio and Television in Peoria, and the first female president of the National Association of Farm Broadcasters. Thank you for being here, Director Callahan.
Thank you for the invitation.
Next, I'm pleased to introduce Ms. Sarah Rang. Ms. Rang is the Executive Director of the nonprofit Invasive Species Center, whose mission is to protect Canada's land and water from invasive species. Headquartered in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, the Invasive Species Center works with many partners to improve invasive species management by increasing economic analyses, catalyzing action, and sharing knowledge. Ms. Rang also has 30 years of experience in conservation policy and programs, and has worked with governments, nonprofit organizations, and the private sector to help create new environmental initiatives. Welcome, Sarah.
Thanks very much, Erika. Yeah.
And rounding out our panel today is Thor Sigfusson. Mr. Sigfusson received his PhD in business networks from the University of Iceland. And as a result of his PhD research, he founded the Iceland Ocean Cluster and later the Ocean Cluster House in Iceland. The Global Ocean Cluster Network now consists of clusters in 3 continents. In 2020, the first Ocean Cluster House outside of Iceland opened its doors, and the HUS in Portland, Maine. Thor has founded several food-related enterprises, among them with several among them, and he has written 8 books on topics of seafood, international business, and knowledge networks. So welcome, Thor. And so now that you know a little bit about each of our panelists, I'm going to give them each a few minutes to share a bit about their work with you. And then following that, we will move to our questions and discussion. So first up, Director Callahan, who will provide an update on the state's efforts to prevent the movement of invasive bighead and silver carp into the Great Lakes Basin.
Thank you, Erika. And for those who may have been seeing screens, if you were able to see any of the participants, I know you're asked to turn off your cameras. I know it makes the functionality so much easier when we don't have so many competing videos going. But I am actually sitting in Lauren Wobig's office today. And so I am not Lauren Wobig, even though that it indicates that on the screen. I am Colleen Callahan. And it's almost appropriate that it does say Lauren's name rather than mine, because the first thing that I wanted to say this afternoon is that, while I may be the presenter here, I by no means am the one or the ones who on a daily basis focus directly and specifically on the Brandon Road project. And so my thanks go immediately to Lauren Wobig, who is our director of our Office of Water Resources, certainly to John Rogner, who is the assistant director here at the Illinois Department of Natural Resources, and to Kevin Irons, who is our assistant director in our fisheries division. Without them, I wouldn't be presenting today, and this project wouldn't be as advanced as it is today. So with that, I'd like to go to the first slide to indicate what the status is and begin a bit of an update here for you on the Brandon Road project, which is located along the Des Plaines River near Joliet. I'm not going to read these slides to you. You're very capable of doing that. But it is important to note that this location has a dam that is extremely tall. It is unusual that one would have this height, and so it makes the perfect location to be really what we call a pinch point to control the invasive carp. And for a variety of opportunities to utilize, as you can see here in this little graphic, electric barriers, water jets, noise, flushing locks, all in an effort to keep the invasive species out of Lake Michigan. And then on the next slide, you'll note that we're now in the PED phase. So we're talking about pre-construction and engineering design, which is the first of 3 phases. And at this juncture, as the non-federal sponsor, which Illinois is, the cost share for that is 65% federal and 35% a state cost share. And so again, for this first phase, the cost is over $28 million, actually closer to 29 as you look at that graphic, over a 3-year period. We yet to have completion of identifying specific land rights for one of the areas. We're still needing to do some soil testing on that site. We're doing physical modeling, designing of the different components, and the initial deterrents. At 30% design, that means that phase 1, 2, and 3, there are 3 phases to this. And so we're hoping that in 3 years, we'll have that phase 1 complete and then move on to non-structural efforts as part of this project. And I do want to focus on that because we talked about some of the deterrents, the bubblers, the electric barrier, and so on. But there should be, and there will be, at least Illinois would like to see that there be an educational component, an informational aspect to what we do, because this is such a significant project, not only for Illinois, but as we all know on this call, for this entire region. And it has worldwide impact. So it would be prudent that we would take the time to include an opportunity at this site to explain why this site now looks the way it does 8 or 10 years later from today, and to identify all the efforts that were made and for the reasons that they were made, and of course to keep invasive species, the invasive carp, out of the Great Lakes. And on the next slide, as we look specifically into the pre-construction engineering, I should say, and design, it means that it does take a village to raise a child and to create a project of this magnitude. And so there have been design meetings and charrettes with certainly the Army Corps, with us, looking at Michigan, who has been a very willing and supportive partner as we look at a non-federal participant here. And as we also consider the various phases, the work that goes on then by the Army Corps at their Engineering Research and Design Center. So the deterrent technology research and the physical modeling is going on there as well as we speak. So to move on to the next slide, when we consider what comes after that, the research and the testing, we mentioned acoustic speakers. Many of us were able earlier this year to be at Lock and Dam 19 at Keokuk, Iowa, to actually see the acoustic speakers that are now in place. So this is another opportunity for us to see the effectiveness of how these are working currently and what they may look like or how they maybe need to be adapted or modified for the Brandon Road project. That also means the physical model of the bubble system is part of the process at the Research and Design Center for the Army Corps. And then also soon will be a longitudinal bubbler at the Peoria Lock and Dam, which will give us yet more indications as to how this piece of what Brandon Road may look like and what may include. On the next slide, as we consider my foundation for the work that I do, both personally and professionally. Anyone who has gotten to know me and has worked with me knows that I abide by 3 C's, and that is to communicate, collaborate, and connect. That means that forums that have involved states and provinces have been held so that we can explain. I believe that we get more done when we explain, not complain, and that means that we give ourselves an opportunity among the states and the provinces to have that communication process take place. Workshops among the navigation industry and the fisheries have taken place and will continue. You can see an example of the newsletter, the Brandon Road Interbasin Project that the Army Corps has just recently issued for informational updates. And Thursday of last week, one of the webinars that offers 2-way communication from stakeholders who were invited not only to attend, but to ask questions and to provide some input too, because this is the planning part of this process and maybe something that they might ask or suggest should be considered. So as we move away from those 3 C's and we get into Illinois specifically and what that means for us as a state, we must abide by our Illinois public water regulations, as the next slide will show. And it indicates that IDNR is called to jealously guard and vigilantly protect the rights, the interests, and the uses of the public in any public body of water, including the natural resources thereof. Now, I said I wasn't going to read these slides. That one I read on purpose because it has to be our guide here in the state of Illinois as we participate in planning this project. So the public water project impacts must, for all of the reasons that we just identified, as we jealously guard, vigilantly protect the rights, we've got to avoid, minimize, and mitigate anything that would interrupt what our guide and responsibility is. So 6 key areas that we've asked to be included as we planned for the Brandon Road project. And the next slide will show those 6 are including public safety, certainly navigation, public water access, transportation, recreation, and aquatic species movement. So when we talk about regulations here in Illinois, those are 6 areas that we know that we need to rise to the table for discussion, because they are ones that we absolutely have to have as considerations for this project to be located in the state of Illinois. And then when we look to some examples on the next slide, examples of partner input opportunities for a better project. You'll see in this illustration that there's a little curve there, and what we've indicated there is we have proposed that maybe we shorten that entry, that we shorten that whole channel a little bit, which would, one, decrease the cost. And now we're talking about avoiding, minimizing, and mitigating on this project. But as we collaborate, consider shortening that channel, not only to reduce the cost, it would create a place for the fish to go. If you think about how we're approaching this and how we ask those fish to not go any further than all those barriers that we put in place, if you were the fish, you'd probably say, well, where am I supposed to go now? And so this would create a place for those fish to go. So that's one of the things that we have proposed for discussion as we've gotten into this early on during the PED discussion, and hope that this may be an even better project than originally planned. And likely it will be because of so many who are so not only interested, but have devoted a lifetime to this kind of issue. And clearly, two heads being better than one, we've got multiple heads that have been able to have provided input. And in my final slide, our mission continues. It's not only about the barrier or the barrier that also exists, certainly in the Romeoville location, but strategic and science-driven harvest removals. So that means that we've been working with a variety of partners, contract and removal in the upper Illinois waterways, enhancing efforts with commercial fishers in the lower part of that Illinois waterway, to the extent that within a pretty short period of time, we have been able to work with those commercial fishermen and help them now establish their own fishermen's co-op. It's been a big difference to that group rather than working independently, which they still do, but now they have a group, an organization that can speak collectively and with one voice about what they need, such as an ice machine along the Illinois River as they're harvesting the invasive species. And we also have a number of businesses and identified a number of economic solutions in addition to these structural processes that we're talking about, not the least of which is engaging with the food service industry. So I will leave it there. I know that you'll have a lot of questions likely after the other presenters, and I do thank you for this opportunity to present.
Thank you, Director Callahan. We appreciate Illinois' leadership on this important issue. Now I'd like to invite Ms. Rang to share some of the work going on at the Invasive Species Center to explore innovative financing options for invasive species management with a focus on the invasive plant Phragmites.
Thanks very much, Erika, and thanks for joining us today. I just wanted to present a project really on behalf of the Invasive Species Center. We're a nonprofit headquartered in Sault Ste. Marie, and this is our mission. On the next slide, you'll see what many of us work on, which is some of the challenges in invasive species management. So many of you on the line will be very familiar with the increasing damages and increasing costs that we're seeing from invasive species across the Great Lakes Basin. Globally, costs are estimated to be doubling about every decade. In Ontario, where we've done some work in estimating, it's about a $3.6 billion impact to a variety of different sectors. And at the local government level in Ontario, we see investments of about $50 million annually in terms of managing invasive species. What we see is that while we know along the invasion curve, prevention is the most cost-effective stage of managing invasives, many of our projects and actions are still taking place at later stages in terms of control and management. Many projects have limited financing and really require a long-term commitment in order to make progress on invasives. It's not one and done. It really is a thing that has to be financed and repeated over a number of different years. We also know that invasive species management is often fragmented with lots of different agencies, although there are examples of great collaboration around the basin. There's often a mismatch between those that benefit from invasive species management and those that are paying or supporting treatment. And as many of you know, invasive species go across the landscape, occur on both publicly and privately owned land. And so, you know, that fence line can be an incredibly challenging thing in the field to actually manage invasive species. Next slide, please. And what we'll see is there's some opportunities in terms of invasive species management. Globally, there's this huge new increase in sustainable finance or conservation finance, impact investment. It's sort of got many different names, but the idea being new financing tools, green bonds, green funds. These tools can be incredibly helpful to us in the invasive species management field because they have the ability to complement or augment existing funding sources, bring new partners to the table, and provide that structure for long-term financing and also collaborative partnership. So we took, next slide, please. We took really both of these challenges and opportunities, and we put it together in a project. And again, it's many partners. It's ourselves, Quantified Ventures, Nature Conservancy, and the governors and premiers, who are all sharing interest in applying these new financing tools to our aquatic invasive species challenges. So we focused on a feasibility assessment of an invasive plant called phragmites, which might be familiar to those of you on the call. It's considered Canada's worst invasive plant. And we were working on it in an iterative way, quantifying the cost and benefits of the phragmites management program, identifying partners and potential payers, and proposing financial structures. And what you'll see on the next slide is that we have many of you will be very familiar with phragmites, which grows very tall like this. It forms a huge monoculture. It can totally take over your wetlands and cause a variety of different impacts. On the next slide, you'll see why we chose phragmites, which is really because it is everywhere and it does have very extensive impacts. So you'll see it throughout the Great Lakes Basin, and you'll also see the impacts being on many different sectors and in many different ways. This is just a list of the impact of phragmites in the Great Lakes region. So what we did is illustrated on the next slide, which is we take a look at if we're trying to create this comprehension vision for the collaborative action around phragmites. And we looked at it really at a provincial scale, trying to integrate local, regional, and province-wide efforts. And we worked together to develop one of the first frag cost benefit analysis. This project was the result of many partners, some of which are listed here. And those two reports are available on our website and also our Green Shovels website as well. So that piece kind of provided us with the collaborative vision of the program that we were hoping to work on, and also some of the cost benefits. The next slide will show you what we did with those two products. It'll give you a sense of what the estimated benefits are of frag control in Ontario. It's around 100 million a year and around 350 million a one-time benefit. And what we did was estimate it in various different sectors. You'll see a very large property value benefit, and this is really, if any of you know frag, you know how it can take over a waterfront, reducing vistas and appeal. And you'll see a fairly large tourism and recreation benefit as well. So we know that it actually the benefits of frag control do outweigh the costs of frag control, and that gives us what we need in terms of moving forward on conservation finance. In the next slide, you'll see that we put it all together in this vision for frag management via outcomes-based financing. The first column there on the left is the proposed intervention, which is our frag framework. It outlines the vision for a multi-year landscape and regional-based approach. It identifies a robust source of multi-year funding so that we can have that long-term planning that really pays benefits. And it helps us recognize and support the many great frag projects that are already underway in many local areas. Then we took a look at how can we finance this intervention in terms of creating a collaborative structure with investors who then provide capital to develop and also implement the program. And the proceeds then can be used by many different partners to work on individual sites where intervention is needed. It's a collaborative approach, which is identified in the third column there, where the beneficiaries of frag management pay for the outcomes. There's many different groups that this could cover, including different orders of government, the private sector, residential, and interests as well. The real advantage of this kind of approach is it brings multiple stakeholders to the table, so that the financial burden of frag management or invasive species management doesn't fall just on one entity. It also allows you a better coordinated, more efficient, and a larger scale effort. As we'll see in the next slide, that has led us to develop a couple of ideas in terms of high-level approach to financing frag management. At this stage, we're exploring the idea of a regional scale revolving fund in order to finance frag management for a couple of reasons there. It allows funding over the long term and into the future. It allows you to work regionally, but also at a province-wide scale and potentially a regional scale as new stakeholders could join in. And it allows the fund to be capitalized and paid back from multiple different sources, some of which are listed there as well. In the next slide, you'll see our next steps in terms of the project. We do believe that outcome-based financing is scalable and transferable to other areas, perhaps in your backyard, and also other species. We've talked about frag today, but it also has a potential for other species as well. We do believe it can help us in some of the challenges that we're all experiencing on aquatic invasive species. Internally, what we're doing is working on that iterative process of refining our financial analysis and looking at a wide range of partners to discuss it with. We're interested in your thoughts and also your partnerships. Please let us know if you're interested. I'll just leave you with the next slide, which outlines our contact information if it's an approach that kind of intrigues you and you want to discuss it further. That's my contacts there, Sarah Rang. I've also put up Ben Cohen's, who's the lead from the Quantified Ventures, who's the expert in terms of the financing approach. And just wanted to close with appreciating the ongoing support from the partners who are helping to support this project. I'll leave it there and turn it back to you, Erika.
Thank you for that overview. And our next speaker this morning, or excuse me, this afternoon, before we move to our questions and discussion, is Mr. Sigfusson, and he will share a bit about his work ongoing in Iceland and its potential application here in the Great Lakes region to help with our invasive carp problem.
Thank you, Erika. Great to be with you. It's been a great road to this point where we've been collaborating with the Great Lakes on this issue of the invasive species in the Great Lakes. If I may just give you an introduction to what Icelanders have been doing in the last few years. Maybe next slide. We have been in the forefront of the world in what we called the incredible fish value machine, meaning that we see the whole fisheries only growing if we're able to have a complete value line from the harvesting to the end value and look at all the parts of this value line as the key to the success and the competitiveness of the industry. And gladly, we are now up to nearly 80% usage of our whitefish, while most countries we are comparing ourselves with are closer to 50 to 55%, meaning that nearly 40–45% of the bite of the whole fish is actually used for landfill in most countries. And this is the sad part. But it's also an opportunity with regards to the invasive species, because what we see is that if we can look at this whole value line with regards to invasive species, as we've done in Iceland in some cases in the past, we are finding ways to create more value from these species. And if we can create more value from them, it makes the whole value chain much more efficient. And that's basically what we've been doing with the Icelandic cod, for instance. This picture indicates that we are creating enzymes, we're doing cod roes, all kinds of leather products from the cod and actually other whitefish species as well. And this means that we have not only doubled the value of each cod, we can actually see it tripled and even fivefold in the coming 10 to 15 years. Next slide, please. Probably this one shows us best what Icelanders have been doing. We call it the 100% fish. And there are companies in Iceland now who are emphasizing on creating value from all parts of the fish and leaving nothing to the landfill or to throw away. And it's not philanthropy. It's basically the reason for this is that some of the best proteins in seafood are actually in the byproducts, not in the fillet. So we're finding all kinds of values from the intestines, from the liver, of course, from the fish skin. And it means that we are creating jobs as well in Iceland, in a country which doesn't have that many other resources. We, of course, realize that we need to treat these resources as professionally as we can. This is probably one of the reasons that we have been able to create a large startup community and a dynamic industry that are working together to create new projects and new products that are sold globally. Next slide, please. What I think is probably the Icelandic model, if we can say that here, with regards to the invasive species as well, is that it is based on the extensive collaboration model. I really loved what the last speaker was talking about, the 3 C's, the collaborative part, and the connecting part, and the communicating part. And this extensive collaboration is the key to the success of the Icelandic model. We also have to realize that the investment capability has to be there as well. And the new technology, there is a continued development going on in the seafood industry, which is the key proponent of the success of the Icelandic industry. We would not be able to compete on a global market if it wasn't for the fact that we have introduced new technology that I'll tell you a little bit more about later on. And then, not least, we have competitive government funding for research. And this is what I see as well in the Great Lakes region, which is a crucial part. The government has to play a part here to also create more collaboration among the fishermen. The fishermen are not sort of naturally positioned to work together. These are natural resources, and they tend not to have, in the past at least, worked very much together. But government funding, competitive funding, can initiate all kinds of collaboration, which I find already happening in the Great Lakes, and which is so crucial, because the whole thing here relies on the mindset of collaborating, the mindset of realizing that we have more value probably in the invasive carp than most realize. Next slide, please. So if we just look at the invasive carp, the whitefish we have here in our discussions. What I think is quite interesting is that what we have found out is that this fish has huge potentials in terms of the value creation. And it was kind of a surprise for me even. I had no idea that we could actually make so much out of it with the new technology that we have been introducing here in Iceland. What we did was to bring the carp to Iceland, frozen of course, and get the best specialists and the best technology to find a solution to develop as good products as possible, as could be possible with this invasive species. Next slide, please. So our task was to develop a strategy with suggested actions to maximize the utilization of the invasive carp in the Great Lakes. We were not sure how this would develop, but it was quite interesting when we finally received the carp here in Iceland and started to get the group together. We had some of the biggest companies in the world working with us, companies including a company called Marel, which is one of the biggest in the world in fish processing technology, a company called Curio. We had also the Research Institute here in Iceland, which is called Mattis. So we brought them all together in one space to discuss this and to find the best ways to do it. At the same time, we had some of the best technology available for us to try on, not only here in the Reykjavik capital of Iceland, but also in some of the communities outside of Reykjavik. So actually, our carp was actually transported a little bit, but it made it even more interesting. So to begin with, next slide, please. To begin with, we started the heading and sort of basic processing. what was interesting is that we found out that the technology that we already have, even though very few have been trying it on with the carp in question, it seemed to work quite well with the same technology as we're using with other whitefish species. So this was already something that was a very good and positive sign to what was going to be happening in the process. Next slide, please. Just to give you an idea of where we stood with it with regards to the testing, we were quite pleased to see how large the fillet with the skin on was in terms of the full weight in comparison to the full weight, and the head as well. And then so all the indications were that even though this is not new to many of the people that are already processing it, we were very confident that we had a percentage here with a quality fillet and the heads as well. That meant that there was a potential here to continue to create the value. And to the next slide, please. One of the most interesting part of the whole thing was actually, I think, is that Icelanders have a long tradition using geothermal power to dry whitefish heads and export them to foreign markets, mainly to Africa. And this has meant that we have been around $5. The price has been around $5 a kilo for the cod heads to the African markets. And these products are used for various reasons in Africa. Of course, these are nations that need the proteins, but these are also good for fish soups and others. So we were quite anxious to see if we could do the same with the Asian carp, with the carp, which is to dry the heads and find ways to see if that could be an opening for the African markets. Not, of course, using geothermal power if it's going to be done in the Great Lakes, but other methods are available as well. The first indications were, at least, that these products, the carp heads, have potentials that we would like to explore even further. So that was a very positive sign. But I will still say, next slide, that the most amazing part for all of us here in Iceland is that the filleting, using the best available technology in terms of getting as much fillet out of the carp and get as high quality fillet as possible, led to quite amazing results for all of us here. The next slide. Using this high technology, which is using laser technology and the best cutting machinery in the world, we found that the fillet itself was quite wide and pure, which is a crucial element in terms of the marketing of whitefish, to get rid of the blood stains that are often in these fillets. And it meant that we also saw, talking to the marketing people in Iceland, that there were opportunities to find ways to create more value from the sales of the fillets. So that was another thing that we thought would be an indication of where we could go. We also tested some of the intestines. It still has to do. We still have more work to do there, but all indications are that even the intestines have an opportunity. We might see also the fish skin being an opportunity here. So keep in mind, we're coming from a small nation, small fishing nation, that is taking the whitefish, coming to Iceland, and creating value from it, not only from the fillet, but from the whole fish. And we see that we can, in many ways, duplicate what we've learned with our cod and with our haddock, and even in some cases with our carp as well, our Atlantic carp, to duplicate that technology and that mindset and that approach over to the invasive carp in the Great Lakes. Next slide, please. So our study shows huge potential if further collaborations developed among fish processors and new technologies introduced to create high quality fillets and value from all the byproducts. Success will only be realized, however, with extensive collaboration within the industry, new investments and government support. And I want to emphasize here the importance, of course, to understand that if we look at the value line that I told you about in the beginning, we're still saying that if we are able to create more value from the invasive carp, we are all, of course, giving much more incentives for developing better harvesting and developing more technology and better fishing methods in terms of the invasive carp. So all this goes hand in hand, and it's very important that we just emphasize once again that this has to be done through collaborative efforts. No one is going to do it alone. It has to be done with a strong support from government. We would recommend definitely this competitive research funds that have done wonders, both I know in Iceland, I know in Norway as well, where they've developed lots of collaboration among industry, and not only industry, but also collaboration with research, with clusters, with people from different parts that have made these industries here in Iceland and in Norway, if I'm taking that as an example as well, a much more dynamic value creating industries. So we have an opportunity here, and I'm glad to share the Icelandic experience with you, and I hope to answer any questions if they are. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So now that we have heard from all of our panelists, we're happy to accept questions from the audience this afternoon. So if you are joining us today and have a question for one or more of our panelists, please feel free to use the question pane in the GoToWebinar function to ask those questions, and we'll be monitoring that throughout. But to go ahead and get us started, and if I could have all the panelists turn their cameras back on, please. Great. To get us started, I might go ahead and ask a question of Sarah. Thank you for that presentation, and I was really interested to see the quantification of all the costs associated with phragmites, which gives you, I think, a good platform for going out and talking about the importance of managing this costly species. When you're thinking about this innovative financing approach and carrying it forward to other species, do you see any challenges with trying to apply it to a species that's not here yet, where it might be more difficult to quantify those benefits of management or prevention?
Yeah, thanks, Erika. When we first started the project, we did look at a couple of other invasives, and we learned something from each one of them. And I think as time goes on and as a community, we will learn really what works and what makes a good candidate for conservation finance or outcomes-based financing. Frag, I think, really does. You know, you're really looking for something that has relatively widespread, relatively high impacts, and lots of different impacts on different sectors. So if, you know, to your question, if something isn't here yet, could you do it as a preventive one? Certainly, it's just a lot harder sell, I would say. And in general, you know, we have a huge amount of appreciation of things that are here and are impacting us. It's much harder for us to have the same kind of interest sometimes in things that aren't here yet. And that's often the problems that we see with invasives. We want to be proactive and preventative and strike early and get the first patch. But it is often more difficult. So certainly I think the preventative aspect is hugely important in invasive species management. It could be very useful, I think, if we had a conservation finance that focused on prevention and also an early detection. So not necessarily species specific, but stage specific, if that's a mouthful. You know, I think that might be more the way to go, is just to how do we actually do finance work in terms of prevention, early detection, and rapid response, that end of the invasion curve. You know, you could do a fund around that. It would certainly be something pretty interesting to explore.
Yes, Director Callahan,
Erika, do you mind if I ask Sarah a question?
please.
I was wondering, Sarah, as I listened intently to your presentation, it reminded me that when I was at USDA Rural Development, that I met with a group who wanted to know if we had funding to use for their project, where they were trying to find a use for the phragmites. They wanted to harvest them and use them as biomass so that they could be used in a digester for energy use later. Is this complete eradication, or is there some thought about another use for the phragmites?
It's a great question, and we've had similar inquiries in terms of the use as biomass for frag, because it, you know, grows so wildly and crazily. And it is more common certainly in other jurisdictions where they do actually grow frag to be used in biomass. We've worked with a couple of different companies to explore it, but as far as I know, it's still just in the exploration kind of stage, as opposed to sort of commercially available stage, certainly in Ontario. But yeah, I do think there's potential, just like the, you know, Thor's example in terms of the whole value sense of, you know, the fish, the same is, I think, true of other invasives as well, looking at it as a whole value. And certainly if you can make a useful use out of an invasive in terms of biomass, that's definitely something to explore. So definitely an interest there. Right now, it doesn't seem to be in commercial kind of use, certainly in Ontario, but I share your interest for sure.
Thank you.
And just building off of that while we wait for some more audience questions to come in, as we think about sort of incentivizing harvest of invasive species, you know, a common debate that has come up, at least as far as I've been engaged in invasive species management, is that potential to create and apply an economic value to something that you eventually want to get rid of. So how do you think ahead towards sort of off-ramping that economic or incentive value that you build over time when you've reached the point where populations are at either, you know, a level where they're not creating impact, or we've managed somehow to get to complete eradication? So how do you manage those risks as you incentivize these harvesting efforts? And I'd just be interested in any thoughts you have on that from any of the panelists.
Apparently no one wants to start on that one, and I certainly don't have all the answers, but I'm particularly interested in what Thor has to say about this. But I will add the way that we have evaluated it, and what I have learned about what at least we're doing here in Illinois is that because the invasive carp, formerly known as Asian carp, is so incredibly productive. The amount of fish eggs that is produced is beyond one's imagination almost. And as Kevin Irons, who is on the webinar today, has said, it's almost like mowing your lawn. You can't just mow it once and be done. You always have to do it because it's always growing back. Even after a drought, it continues to grow back again. You don't have to reseed it, it still comes back. And so for us, it's about management. And that's how we've approached it. It is that, are we trying to eradicate it, or are we trying to manage it? And right now we're trying to manage it and doing the best we can, utilizing the alternatives that we've identified and engaging and collaborating with the fishermen and with those who want to become involved in that industry to the extent that Thor has outlined, as has been done with the cod.
Yeah, this is
right.
the reason why,
you know,
Erika,
this ability go ahead.
I was just going to say, this is the reason why I was kind of silent, because there is no easy answer here. And I think Colleen is absolutely right. And I would just to stress what she's saying is that the collaboration here is so crucial. And this is something that, but I would also like to remind us, just as you were saying in the beginning, that this, there needs to be a profit motive as well. And there is the opportunity to look at this as an opportunity for the industry and for new jobs and for the creation of wealth in the community. And even though we're always saying it's an invasive species, we've had invasive species in other countries. Some of them were in Iceland, and we were quite quick to respond to them. And of course, the issues that we have with the invasive carp in the Great Lakes are quite different, and there are more challenges, I know. But at least there is this mindset element that I think is so crucial, that we need to look at this as an opportunity as well, but it has to be done through a widespread collaboration.
And I think, to some of Director Callahan's points, what makes these invasive species so invasive is often their high reproductive capability. And when you do have an established species, it maybe you reach that point where it's, can we manage it down to a level where the impacts are minimized, but it's then an ongoing long-term management program as opposed to working towards eradication, for example. So I think all that has to be thought through as we look at these different approaches. Sarah, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I think we can also think about eradication in some areas and management in other areas, so that allows us a bit of sort of intellectual freedom to kind of try different things in different places. It's always good to sort of work on the prevention and eradication end of the scale. That's the most cost effective and sort of environmentally least damaging end of the scale to work at. But with a problem like in phragmites, for example, in Northern Ontario, that is possible. It is possible to sort of work, because there's small patches, it is possible to kind of still work and eradicate frag in Northern Ontario. In Southwestern Ontario, where it is, widespread across the landscape, you really do need different tools and thinking about it. And so I tend to kind of think of those terms more as a landscape-based kind of term, as opposed to just a conceptual term, because otherwise I find it's harder to kind of have the innovation that we need to think of, allow ourselves new approaches and new ways of thinking about it.
Thank you. So I'd like to use that. This may be our last question as we're slowly ticking away at our time here, but given that, and we think about these efforts and managing invasive species, how do you think about measuring your success and communicating your success, especially when, you may have members of the public who expect eradication or complete removal to be, the end goal, where maybe you're looking at one site, but not at other sites. So how do you define your success in these efforts and communicate, your goals and what you're trying to accomplish to the public? And that's for anyone to address.
Well, just to start us off, I guess one of the advantages of an outcome-based financing is you do decide the outcomes. So it's very clear as to how payment would flow. So unlike sort of other projects where success could be defined in different ways, an outcome-based financing is very specific in terms of the outcomes that need to be met in order for repayment to occur. So it has the advantage of sort of clarity and discussion about what success looks like and what can we do. So it's kind of baked right into the financing itself.
If I may, maybe not invasive species, but at least some of the products that we've been developing here in Iceland. If we would look at, for instance, the cod liver 30 years ago was mainly thrown away. And people started to think, well, what could we do with it? Of course, there have been some fish oil made from it, but there were no incentives for the fishermen to hold on to it. But as soon as we saw the value line being created around even this small byproduct that was actually treated as waste in the past, we saw the prices increase Certainly people are not only doing fish oil, they were doing all kinds of medical products, etc., from the fish oil. And it meant that the fishermen received more payments for their catch, for their liver. So they didn't throw it away, they kept it in special containers. And since then, no one in Iceland would actually be thinking about throwing away this byproduct. And this is exactly what needs to happen. As soon as we get people to understand what kind of value there is in the opportunities to develop more high-end products, having all these amazing institutions all around the Great Lakes to do these amazing things, whether it is biotech or whatever, with these proteins that are, of course, some of the best proteins in the world in this invasive species, then suddenly things start to click. And it means a different mindset, of course, but this is doable. So I would say, if I'm defining success, I would like to see new jobs being created, more institutions being brought in. Sadly, there are so few institutions, even in the biotech sector in the US, that understand the value in some of the ocean proteins. The oceans and the waters are still really not thought of as an opportunity. So we need to bring the biotech sector into it as well. And that might probably be a very clever move for us to go to the absolutely highest level of the value chain and see if they might actually trickle down some of their knowledge and interest in getting the fishermen to keep some of their byproducts and some of their opportunities, and create opportunities for both.
Erika, I would say, as far as the Brandon Road project, we hope that those who use the river, whether it's for navigation or recreation or for sustenance, those who actually fish the river for their daily protein needs, as well as the Great Lakes and the provinces, will say that at the conclusion of the Brandon Road project, that if we can do this well, when we collaborate, when we communicate and connect, and an education piece is a component of that, that people will say thank you. Thank you for this project. Thank you for helping us learn. Thank you for helping us realize why this investment was made, rather than saying darn you. And so that's our goal as we look to the Brandon Road completion and the control, and I'll say control, of the invasive species.
And certainly when you're dealing with prevention, you know, our continued success is evidenced by the fact that we don't have invasive carp in the Great Lakes Basin. So thank you again for everyone participating today and sharing your information on these different efforts. I hope our audience and attendees today learned something new and are energized to go out and start exploring and finding out more about these different initiatives and engaging in these partnerships and collaborative efforts that are really so important to making our invasive species prevention and control efforts a success. I think if you didn't pick up on it, a key theme of today is partnership and collaboration, and we see that across all of these efforts and across the Great Lakes region. So with that, if our panelists would like to make any concluding remarks, I will just offer up one more chance to say anything else before we wrap up today.
Just a big thank you probably from all our panelists to the organizers for the opportunity. Yeah.
Yeah, my thanks as well, Erika, and my thanks too for the broad-based foundation of what everyone has talked about, and that is to those 3 C's: communicate, collaborate, and connect. We can do the first 2, but if we don't connect, as Thor has said, with the stakeholders, with those who might not realize the potential impact here, then we haven't really completed the process, and we give ourselves less of a chance of being successful. So thank you, Erika, for having this opportunity for all of us to share our thoughts.
Just, if I may, just best regards from Iceland. Colleen, I'll probably take away the 3 C's. I absolutely love them. So that was a very good, and I think it's in line with what Erika is saying, that the collaboration part here is clearly the outstanding one. But thanks a lot for allowing me to be a part of this amazing panel. Thank you.
And I will in turn extend my thanks again to Dave Nafsker and the governors and premiers for organizing the panel, giving us all this opportunity, and turn it back to Dave to formally wrap us up.
Thank you, Erika. And I think Director Callahan nailed it on the head. We don't say thank you enough. We don't hear thank you enough. So let me add my voice to the ones that you've already heard from. We've had some terrific partnerships on invasive species, and you heard from several of our partners today. I would mention that we have a number of things on our website if you'd like to learn more. That includes the resolution that the governors and the premiers recently adopted related to Brandon Road and the work that Director Callahan described. The Iceland Ocean Cluster report on 100% invasive carp that Thor Sigfusson talked about, and the Quantified Ventures Invasive Species Center report on addressing phragmites through outcomes-based financing. Lastly, I would also mention that our partners in Wisconsin and the Department of Natural Resources have made available a report on a virtual rapid response exercise that we coordinated with them several months ago. So that brings to a close our conversation today. We have one session remaining in our Leadership Summit webinar series. That will be October 15th at 2 o'clock Eastern, focused on the economic development opportunity of carbon. The Lieutenant Governor from Wisconsin will moderate, and we have a terrific panel, so we hope you can join us. Today's session, as I mentioned, has been recorded. If anyone in your network may be interested, please refer them to our website, www.gsgp.org. It will be there later today, as well as all the slides that you saw. So with that, one final word of thanks. Appreciate everyone joining us today. Goodbye.